Okay, Happy New Year, everybody, and thank you for coming to the first episode of the Digression Sessions. The Digression Sessions is going to be a new podcast segment I'm launching, and it's going to be a panel show where I have interesting people on to discuss interesting topics. And today I have two Xanadu Review alumni back on the show, and we're going to be discussing the year 2024 in review and starting to make some predictions about 2025. Alright, guys, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Do you want to go first, or do I?
No, you start.
All right. I'm Yakubian Ape here on Substack. I mostly write about pop culture and where that collides with politics, as they say. Politics is downstream of culture, and I think that's criminally overlooked most of the time. So that's my wheelhouse. And I've been on the Xanadu review before. Really enjoyed talking to Prester John. Glad to be back.
Well, I'm Lurpa Strike, and I tend to write about two things. I kind of have two different publications on there. One is just kind of like memoir style stories about my life, and then the other is I just kind of weigh in on like a lot of cultural issues, namely around gender primarily. And yeah, gender relations, stuff like that, with the occasional current event commentary. Yeah, and I've been on here once too. I believe I was the inaugural guest, so that was a lot of fun, and I'm happy to be back.
You were, in fact. I have guests 1 and 2, so
Excellent.
chronologically not like ratings. So the year in review, I guess. What surprised you guys the most, or what did you see coming? Like, what thoughts? Anything? Like what was like the most surprising to either of you? We'll start with that, maybe.
Well, I'll say that I think that Vance being like a sudden hottie was unexpected for sure. Like all the attention he received, that was something I didn't really expect.
Oh yeah, we did our first podcast like the day after, basically, if I recall, and that's when the script kind of flipped on him from like, oh my god, JD Vance is weird, to like, oh my god, JD Vance is hot.
Yeah, pretty much.
So I think JD Vance in general was just not something he's not a guy I thought was going to get picked to be vice president. I didn't even know he was in the running until like the day before. And I was, and this is something that surprised me, is just the general lurch to the right by the Gray tribe, Silicon Valley, which I think, not Tesla, what am I saying? Musk is like the poster boy for it, but I think that JD Vance, with all of his ties to Palantir and Peter Thiel, is an even bigger indication of which way they're moving. And that was something that, maybe I just wasn't reading the tea leaves right, because apparently some of these guys have been moving that direction for a while. Peter Thiel's been in the Trump train for quite a bit, but I did not expect to see like guys like Musk just go so. Musk basically bet it all on black with Trump.
Yeah, and he might have blown that already, but we can get to the whole his debacle in a second. But yeah, I kind of feel the same way. Where like I didn't really know, like I'd heard of like his book and movie that came out, and that was like 2015 or something, right? And he was more of like, what do they call it, Hicklib? And I didn't even know he was a senator basically until he got the nomination. And then I went back and like read his book and found out about him. I'm still a little, I don't know, trepidatious, I guess you could say, about him. He seems like he's very much a chameleon, but I think you're right. It's I've been kind of following a little bit. They call it the PayPal mafia, like Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, all those like the quote unquote tech bro people who like the standard line I hear is like generally these are guys who are like libertarian, who just wanted to more or less do their thing, be left alone. But they feel like the regulation stuff has gotten to the point where it's becoming, underlining their bottom line, pretty much undermining that is.
Yeah, and I think that just speaks to the broader breakdown of the Democrat Party's coalition of voters that we saw this year, which was, I don't really know. I guess it did happen this year. It started in 2023 with October 7th in Israel, but like this year was the year that you really just saw all that, the Gaza protests and everything pretty much split the Democrat Party down the middle. And if you had told me that was going to happen after the October 7th attacks, I wouldn't have believed it would have gotten as dramatic as it did.
Yeah, it definitely feels like there is a vibe shift. And now, Lerpa, we were talking on our podcast. It feels like there's definitely a vibe shift since I think you were even talking about, like some former, like Bernie, Occupy Wall Street people who have gone to Trump, and it definitely feels like
Yeah.
there's a vibe shift. What are your
Well,
thoughts on that? Do you feel the vibe shift? Do you think that's kind of overblown?
no, I definitely feel it still. I think, and those people who went, from Bernie to Trump, like that kind of pipeline, it seems like a lot of them have embraced like more of a traditional lifestyle. A lot of them have converted either back to Christianity or, like they found their childhood faith again, whatever. Like we see a lot of that right now. And that seems to be like the main driver behind a lot of those folks that I can think of off the top of my head that I know. And so I just wonder how much of that like desire to return to tradition has to do with this rightward shift that we're seeing among this gray tribe or whatever.
Yeah, I'd not heard that term "gray tribe." Ape, do you have like a QED on that, or is that just like just means the tech bros?
Yeah, so I actually had to look up the source of it myself earlier while I was writing about the whole um, Musk debacle that's going on. And if you look up Gray Trap, I'm just pulling up Wiktionary right now because that it says coined by psychiatrist and blogger Scott Alexander Siskind in 2014, and it is a loosely defined culture in the United States associated with Silicon Valley nerd culture and political beliefs that fall outside of the left wing and right wing paradigm. And I don't know if I totally agree with that because I don't really in a nerd culture think of like Comic Con. I don't think of the gadget bros that you remember, like those guys who used to buy like every single iPhone.
Hmm.
I suppose that could be nerd culture, but I think that's probably what they're talking about is like those type of guys and just basically any of those dudes who were like really into Silicon Valley in the mid teens, I suppose. The best way I could put it is like, when I think of Gray Tribe guys, I think of guys in my town who are like remote workers, really into crypto, really into like the next big thing. They're all pushing AI integration, basically everything. That's the Gray Tribe.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems a lot more libertarian than
Yeah.
right wing, and I guess
And
libertarians kind of can be either or, right?
and it definitely has like libertarian stripes to it because a lot of them like, you know, a lot of people are surprised by what Elon Musk is saying about H-1B1 visas, but the whole thing is like he wants what's best for his company. Ultimately, at the end of the day, that's a very libertarian thing. They're a lot of these guys, these business libertarians, are bottom line dudes.
Yeah, very true. I mean, it feels pretty on brand since I mean, to me, like, I don't really have a super strong opinion on Elon Musk, really, because to me, like, having an opinion on an individual billionaire is like having an opinion on an individual like hurricane, if that makes sense. Like, it's almost a force of nature. It's gonna do what it's gonna do. Sometimes there's like incidental benefits, like a hurricane will like uh, clear out some dead brush or like distribute some silt to make plants grow better, but like I don't know. That having been said, this feels pretty on brand for Elon Musk in that world since I don't know like I work in the tech world and I feel like there's definitely been a noticeable vibe shift there as well. I don't know if you guys have noticed that in your world as well.
No,
I
what
mean,
kind of, I'm not in that world myself, the tech world, so I haven't noticed it personally.
Hmm. It definitely feels.
yeah, I mean,
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, I'm only adjacent to it through people that I know who are much more into it, and I have a lot of acquaintances that are very into that world, and a lot of them swung like they're. I wouldn't call them like bullish on Trump, but they felt as if they didn't have any better option. So I mean, they've shifted in that direction. It feels like more out of necessity, or what they feel is a necessity more than anything. But I definitely have seen what you mean just in my own personal connections who are very deep into all that stuff because they're relatively apolitical people.
Hmm. And I feel like that kind of goes with the vibe shift of like, what's that? That Saddam. I think it was either Saddam. I think it was Saddam Hussein who said like, right and left don't matter that much. People just look for a strong horse, and it feels like I don't. Again, I keep on saying vibe shift, but I remember because I think Lerp. I forgot if I said this to you privately or in the podcast. Like, I felt that Trump was going to win when we discussed it, just based on the fact that, like, I live in a very blue city in a very blue state, and I was seeing like Trump signs, like people with Trump flags and stuff, and you didn't see
Yeah.
that in 2016 or 2020.
Yeah, I think we did talk about that a little bit, and yeah, a lot of people like came out as Trump supporters this year that I noticed. It was like a whole phenomenon that did not happen in the same way in 2016. Like there, after the election, like on my Facebook anyway, there were people that, I mean, I suspected, but like they never said anything publicly until then. It was weird. It was almost like they had coordinated this thing or something. But yeah, people that were otherwise, just kind of lefty or middle of the road, I mean, that you wouldn't expect, like, in the blue city and the blue state and all that. It's just interesting.
Yeah, and in my own experience down in Seattle, once you get outside of the city center, I mean, I was there. God, when was it? The last midterms. You would have thought that Tiffany Smiley, who is the Republican candidate running for the state senate, I believe, you would have thought she was a shoo-in, even in the Seattle suburbs. Her signs were everywhere. Her bumper stickers were everywhere. I couldn't even tell you the name of the woman who won, but and it did not change this election. In fact, it got even more pronounced where you were seeing Trump stuff in parts of Seattle where I think people would have feared for their lives if they had put that up in 2016.
Really? So if you're in the Seattle area, then it must be like, because to me that's the heart of it. Because I was in Portland in like late 2020, early 2021 for work, and that's when it was like at the heart, at the height of the 2020 protests and all that, and there's all this Black Lives Matter stuff. And I don't know, I haven't been to Portland recently, but I would imagine like because that's not so far away. It seems like of all places you wouldn't see that, but that's definitely, it feels like a sea change for sure.
Yeah, and I mean the thing about Washington is I don't live in the Seattle area. It's just the nearest big city, so I go there whenever the occasion demands. But it's almost like Washington's a very red state once you get outside of that general area of Seattle. Like even like I said, the suburbs. I think they went for Trump in the election, which is surprising. Again, they were very open about it.
Yeah, I guess I remember Lerpa you saying, and I'm curious your perspective on this. Like it was like a return to tradition thing, and they went, more right leaning because of that. Like, what would you say? Like, because it sounds like we're all in agreement that there's been, the term this year that everybody says is the vibe shift. Like, when did you notice? Because to me, it sometimes feels like the fact, I don't think it's a secret. Things have gotten, the last 4 years or so have been just kind of insane, and things have just been materially getting worse, and maybe people are going more right leaning because of that. Like this is maybe silly, but it was a couple years ago. To me, I felt like the gravity shifted when that video game came out, the Harry Potter game, Hogwarts: A Legacy, and they're trying to cancel the game, and like there are people who are more culturally left wing who are trying to get it canceled, and harassing people who would do let's plays or reviews, but it just didn't really go anywhere, and that it became like one of the best selling video games. I don't know if all time, but like the best of the year. And to me, like I felt like the gravity shift at that moment, because even a few years ago, I don't. I feel like that would have stopped a lot of people, but everybody's kind of like, whatever. Like the super, culturally left people still abstain, but like the normies were like, whatever. It's Harry Potter. I don't care what J.K. Rowling said on Twitter.
Yeah.
So when did you guys notice? I know like that's kind of more your wheelhouse, Ape, but like I know also like Lurpa, you're in a red state too. So I'd be interested to see like the polls of that. And I'm in Colorado, so it's a pretty like. It's a blue state, but it's a purple state, if that makes sense. So
yeah,
I'm curious.
Virginia's kind of the same. It's still like we went to Harris, I'm pretty sure. It's technically a blue state, but I'm from Minnesota originally, which is much more blue. So I feel like I'm in a red state because I'm in the exurbs of DC. So it's like a lot more rednecky out here. But yeah, I think like when I first started noticing I know what you're talking about with the Harry Potter game and how it seemed like, people cared a lot less than they would have a few years prior. But I think, and I mean, I hate to say it, it seems like an easy answer, but like COVID was really, that's when I started noticing people talking more about the so-called more traditional things. Like that's when everyone wanted to get hens and, everyone had time off of work. Not everyone, of course, but a lot of people had, were working from home or whatever. Everyone wanted to live like the off the grid homestead life, at least in my circles. And some people actually went off and did that, and they became Trump supporters when they were mostly apolitical or left leaning before. Yeah, I feel like it was around then. It was like that forced some sort of mentality on people, or like just made people more open to it, like to just that simple life, since everyone was stuck at home anyway. It's kind of a theory I have anyway. That's when it started.
No, I mean, I think that's pretty accurate. I mean, like you said, there's a lot of people who were stuck at home, a lot of time to think, a lot of time to ruminate on things. It was like the first time for a lot of people, like myself included. I was in Austin at the time, and I traveled around Texas quite frequently, even during the shutdowns. And the thing was, like, Austin was the one place where they did everything by the book. Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio. I mean, San Antonio was pretty bad about the lockdowns, but I mean, even it wasn't as strict as Austin. And you went to like Fort Worth, and you wouldn't even know anything was going on based on the way people were acting.
Right.
And being in Austin at that time and being subjected to that, where it's like you couldn't even go to the grocery store without having to follow just these absolutely ludicrous like walking patterns, and they had security guards who would make sure you went in the proper line, and God help you if you stepped out to like, oh, I forgot something, I got to go back. Well, you got to go back through the whole store, because apparently COVID can only get you when you're walking backwards, I guess.
Yeah, it knows.
But that kind of stuff, I mean, that really made everybody sit, and a lot of people sit and think like, well, what am I doing? Like, what is this? Why are we going nuts over? I know that there's a lot of debate on it, and I know people who almost died from COVID. I know people who had it and were perfectly fine. But ultimately, I think in hindsight, with the way things panned out, we can say that it was an overreaction, an egregious overreaction. And I think that took the wool off a lot of people's eyes.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, it does feel like, and maybe now that we've had, I don't know, a couple of years since it's been, more or less over, it's become like a weird litmus test. But I feel like we've had enough time to sit with it and think, like, because there's definitely some people like, oh, COVID's completely fake. It was, that's how they put, the vaccine is how they put 5G in your blood. But I think, yeah, some of it definitely, like, even, because I was at the time, and, I don't even know how to describe myself politically now, was much more lefty, but definitely living through some of that stuff because, I don't know about you guys, but at the time I was an essential worker. I had IT for the medical industry, and I had all these sites across my state that I had to travel through, and then across the country to have to fly out. It was just, it was a very surreal experience. Like, I mean, for one, flying during COVID was so weird. Like, if you talk about the, the grocery store, like flying was like 10 times more,
Stressful.
restrictive.
That's the only
Yeah,
word
I was
I
a
can find.
TSA officer during COVID during the beginning.
Oh, so was it? That must have been crazy.
Yeah, it
I
was
remember
pretty.
even flying, like doing that and going to hotels, but like it definitely. I think like I said, there was some people who maybe didn't take it seriously enough, but it became like it felt like almost like a borderline religious thing to show how afraid you were of COVID.
Right. And
Yeah.
just a quick anecdote like about that, because it was, I mean, they call TSA security theater, right? But like this was like hygiene theater to the max, because all the rules that we'd have to follow in the airport. I mean, as soon as we got upstairs to the break room, everyone's mask was off. Like there were 30 people like huddled in a tiny spot, like eating and yelling and doing whatever,
Mhm.
like there was no actual like meaning to any of this. It was just like passengers got to see us wipe down, surfaces with alcohol constantly and change our gloves constantly. There wasn't really
Yeah.
anything actually practical going on. Like there'd be teams of people spraying the room with hydrogen peroxide once a day, and I don't know, it was like the break room. It was bizarre. None of it was helpful.
Well, I mean, I feel like that was just pretty much all the stuff, like, following a set path through the grocery store. What is that going to do? I remember I went out with my mom and to get drinks or dinner or something like that. And, you had to wear your mask until you got to the table. And I always joked about it because I was like, it's like COVID's chasing you through the restaurant. And then the minute you sit down, it's like, ah, damn, I missed them. Now I got to wait until
Yep,
they
you
go to the
got safe.
bathroom. And it was like, for what purpose other than to make some people feel better about themselves? I guess that's the only reason I can find that, they would put those measures in place. Like you said, it was all kabuki theater to pander to a certain crowd.
Exactly. Yeah, the difference between like when COVID first started and I was working that TSA job, we were living up in Alexandria, which is just right across the river from DC and much more progressive. And that they enforced rules a lot more strongly, like you were talking about in Austin or wherever. But yeah, then we moved, that October, like later during the year, down to the exurbs, like where it's a lot more red. And yeah, it was like it really was like nothing was happening. Like it was a completely different world than it was closer to DC. Like just kind of amusing.
Yeah, I have some family out in Frederick, and we visited them when all that stuff was going on, and that is exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I remember around that time it was wild that so yeah, I live in a very blue city. It was all about that. But then we went to I think like the summer of 2021. It was still a thing, and we went to North Dakota to see what is it, the Mount Rushmore. Like nobody was masking up. And funny enough, like the day we were there was a Trump rally that evening, so maybe that kind of I don't know colored the demographics a little bit. But I don't know. I guess I kind of have a theory, and I don't want to like get too hung up on COVID since this is 2024. But looping back to the rightward shift thing, or maybe even populist is a better way of putting it, because I remember like it feels like there's a very stark divide between people who had to or were able to work from home and take all these precautions, and if you had to be out and about for your job, and like the level of seriousness that people took it. And I wonder if any of that, because if you look at like the demographics of who voted for who, like the college educated people overwhelmingly voted for Trump, but like the more blue collar people, I'm sorry, reverse that, the college educated people overwhelmingly voted for Harris, but the more blue collar working class people shifted towards Trump. So I wonder if there's any kind of through line there.
Yeah, it made the stark difference between the professional managerial class and the rest of us, pretty stark at that point. I think people really resented being told that, like, you have to go work with the public and put yourself at this risk, but you don't get to like have any fun afterwards. You don't get to do anything like fly somewhere or, because people would be getting lectured about, if they were going to travel, things like that. If you put any pictures up, on social media, indicating that you had, people would lecture you about how you were being unsafe and things like that.
Well, and one of the things that my own personal experience with all that stuff was, when the vaccines were coming out and, everybody was like, oh, you have to get it. You have to get it. You got to do your part. You got to do your part for society. You got to do this. And, it's for everybody's good. And I knew a lot of people, and I kind of felt this way myself to some extent, where I was like, most of you people would not stop to piss on me if I was on fire. Like, let's be completely honest. You've spent the past 4 years calling my demographic every ad hominem under the sun, and now suddenly I have to do these things to make you happy.
And now we're in together.
Why? And I knew other people who felt it much more strongly than I did and refused to take it just on that principle.
Yeah. I mean, I was always kind of agnostic on the whole thing myself, and only later did I start to, because, at the time, like, I was pretty offline, so I was like, yeah, whatever, I'm just trying to, do my job and survive during this crazy time. But it definitely feels like we're having a cultural moment that's a backlash against that whole culture. And I feel like at least to me, like, to loop back to the 2024 side, I don't, to this day, like, I feel like there's some people who are like ride or die for Trump, but a lot of people were just like really fed up with that whole culture. Like myself, did, full discretion, I didn't vote for Trump or Kamala. I didn't like either option, but I definitely felt like, it, because I don't know, maybe that's another thing, like how, I try to be even-handed and fair. Like there's some things that the Biden administration did that I thought were good, like making, some efforts toward, the first steps towards reshoring, but like, it felt really, really, I don't know, poorly done. And like the Kamala Harris campaign was stunningly bad. So I don't know, because I know Lurpa, you're still more on the lefty Democrat side. Like what was your? I think we talked about that a little bit. What was your opinion? Because to me, like it was, even people who I talked to are dyed in the wool lefties are like, wow, the Harris campaign was really, really stunningly bad.
Yeah, it really was. There was like, 30 seconds of excitement, like when I think when they picked walls, and at least in my world there was, because I'm surrounded by Minnesotans, but like online and in the small circle here of me and my husband and in-laws, but like that was about it. And I mean, I voted for her, but with not out of any enthusiasm. It was more like, I don't know. I don't think anyone was all that excited to vote this year. At least not the people I talked to. I feel like the people that I know that acted excited about Kamala weren't actually, like, they were just trying to, I don't know, help other people,
so to speak.
So what? Sorry.
Wag the dog, so to speak.
Yeah, pretty much, exactly. And I don't know. I certainly wasn't excited. It's hard to say. Every year I tell myself, since I've been out here in Virginia, that I'm just like, screw it, I'm going to vote third party like I did back in Minnesota. But I can't bring myself to do it out here. It feels I just don't want, I don't want a Republican. I don't want to be responsible. What can I say?
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. Oh, well. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think anyone was excited. I guess that was my point. Not that many people.
Yeah. No, the campaign, like, it felt, there's some people who are a little bit more conspiracy minded. Like, maybe the Harris campaign was like intentionally bad so they could, jettison, the quote unquote woke stuff, and then they would have like, oh yeah, it was just Kamala Harris. We're moving past that. Because some of the ads they did, like, what was that one? Like, I'm a man and I'm voting for Kamala Harris. I eat carburetors for breakfast. Like, it felt fake.
It did. Incredibly fake. And it was called out as such, like, immediately by everybody. They're just like, this is the stupidest shit. And I can imagine, as like a man, it's probably condescending as hell. So I don't know what they were thinking with that. It's like the out of touch, hello, fellow kids meme. Like, what are they even doing?
Yeah, that was a head scratcher for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a grain of truth to the fact that there was like probably infighting. I mean, it's pretty clear that there's like multiple camps within the Democratic Party. You have your West Coast elites that are the Newsoms and the Harris or the Pelosi, those types, right? And then you've got the East Coast wing, which is the Schumers and the Obamas and all those guys. And I think that they all kind of fell apart and were at each other's throats by the end of it. I noticed Obama he did not want to endorse Kamala Harris. He waited several days to say anything. And I think that's because he wanted to see Biden continue to be the nominee.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there was a lot of politicking behind the scenes.
Yeah, I also heard I forget his name, like it was a guy from like Arizona or somebody like that. I forget exactly who, but yeah, that was excuse me, yeah, another one of those insider baseball things where like some people think that Biden just immediately endorsed Kamala just as an FU to the rest of them. I know, like, for me personally, and I think, Lurp and I talked about this as well, I'm more of like, I came from like the blue dog, like Midwestern Union Democrat side. And, it feels like, that side has just been like more or less completely just forgotten. Like at best you'll get lip service to.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder if any of that's going to come back in 2025, because one thing that I've noticed that's interesting is that ever since, and I don't know if I'm connecting this to Vance inappropriately, but because of his conversion to Catholicism, this is like fascinating to me that he and so many other Catholics are becoming so high profile right now. But I see a lot more like openness to, well, I guess government spending in a sense, but like more welfare programs coming from the right. Like, and I just wonder if that's going to translate into, labor conditions, like if the right's going to actually take up that mantle now that the left has completely abandoned it. And if they're actually going to do so with any sort of usefulness, or if it's just going to be lip service.
Yeah, that'll be
That's a
interesting to
very
see.
interesting. That'll be interesting, but given that as we were talking about earlier, like this gray tribe Musk type of guys, who I genuinely don't think give much of a damn about labor
Right.
conditions, working rights, all that. I'm hesitant. I mean, that's going to be a very fragile coalition going along. One of the interesting things about this whole thing going on with Musk right now is that I believe Vance actually came out and disavowed it and said that he didn't
Huh.
agree. And I mean, I hope that that's a good sign that he'll be, because I'm all about labor rights, working conditions, all that kind of stuff. I
Right.
want to see those improve
Okay.
across the board. And if they're talking about H-1B1 visas, which they can just abuse to get a underclass of serfs from the third world that
Yep.
they can work like dogs and pay pennies, that's the antithesis of what I want to see.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm
Yeah,
hoping that Vance will kind of act as a bulwark, but again, he's got his own ties to Silicon Valley. Only time will tell.
Yeah, we'll see what loyalties win, I guess.
yeah, maybe. I guess maybe I'm too cynical. At the end of the day, like I just, I feel like you're just constantly disappointed, and you're hoping for a little something that's gonna be good for you and your side. But I don't know. But yeah, that whole H-1B thing has been super wild. And for anybody in the audience who hasn't followed it, I guess Christmas Day of all days, Elon Musk I'm not on Twitter, so I don't. Maybe you could speak to the specifics better, Ape, since it sounds like you're talking about it. But he was like, we need more skilled immigrants, and then like his whole base turned on him, and he like freaked out and started banning everybody from Twitter, and because I think you're right. Like, I
Yeah,
mean,
no,
I
that
work in
was
the tech. Sorry, go ahead.
no. I was just gonna say. I mean, like overall, that's like the right. That's the quick rundown of it. But what really stuck in people's craw is like the way that he acted afterwards, where he just had this complete unhinged meltdown. Saying like throwing swear words around and banning people and all that kind of stuff. Like that's where if he wanted to come out and express that opinion, that's fine. But then he acted like a child once people, most of which I saw were relatively polite refutations of it, and then he just had a freak out. That's where I think the issue with. It's not that he like holds that opinion, but just the fact that then he went out and called everybody stupid, and he even like said that they were all like backwards racists, and he would see them all pulled out of the Republican Party root and stem, and I was like, bro, what are
God.
you like for somebody who doesn't like for somebody who is a champion of free speech? That is not the tack I would expect you to take.
Right.
Well, hasn't that always been his thing, more or less? Is like you have free speech as long as you don't use it in any way that I like it, that I would dislike.
Pretty much.
Well, and there's something to be said about that because I mean, do
Mhm.
the left not have their right to speak their piece about DEI politics or whatever?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's a blade that cuts both ways.
yeah. I mean, that's what's the quote, like if you don't agree with free speech, for people with you don't agree with, and you don't actually believe in free speech.
Yeah.
But
Something like that.
yeah, something like that. But to shift gears slightly, like what what is something like for either of you, like is there anything like maybe more on the cultural side that in 2024, if we're doing the retrospective, that really surprised you, or what, or something you thought was cool or interesting? Because I know me and you talked about this a little bit when we were on the podcast together, Ape. Like, the it feels like I saw like multiple different really big name franchises do these major flops. And for me, I'm hoping we'll see like more independent stuff. At least for me, like there's not been a lot like movie wise or music wise that's been new that's really grabbed me. I don't know about you guys though.
Well, the biggest things that I was like the tectonic sea change in the music industry, and I think that had to do with the revelations about Diddy. I had no idea that his story was that long and that dark. Like I didn't even know it was old. But now it's drawing in people like, I mean, one of my predictions for next year is that Jay-Z goes down because now there's all sorts of stuff about him coming out and his connections with Diddy. And it was just like mask off for a lot of those people who were big in the music industry. And it was just a total reversal where these guys, mostly these rap guys who were like huge titans of the industry that used to be like royalty, are now like nobody wants to touch them with a 10-foot pole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels like celebrity culture and cachet in general has, this is the year where like I feel like it kind of hit the wall because again, like not to backtrack too much to the COVID thing, but between like because I remember during COVID there were all those like really tone deaf videos about when celebrities all sang Imagine and stuff, and
Right.
everybody endorsed Kamala, like other than like what Tim Allen, James Woods, and like I don't even know, like Kid Rock, right? Pretty much everybody in major name in Hollywood, the music industry, everybody, they all came out against Trump and they all ate shit. And now on top of that, like, you're seeing, and I wonder, like, would this have happened if, Trump had lost? I mean, I don't want to, because again, like, I don't want to be too conspiratorial about the machinations behind it. But again, the vibe shift seems so different because I remember, like, something I wrote about is, when Eminem endorsed Kamala Harris and like his diss track against Trump, like I remember not even that long ago that would have been scathing, and now it just feels kind of lame, kind of establishment, and it almost feels like we're in a moment culturally, kind of like I was very very young for that, like the very early '90s, where like everything that had been cool for the past 30 years pretty much just like got phased out and everything was new. And like pretty even like I'm not a big Trump supporter at best. Kind of like I think Abe was saying, like at best you hope for, I don't really like him, but he's marginally more on my interest side. That's kind of how I feel about it. But like whenever somebody's super super like never Trumper hater, it feels kind of corny and cliche because it's been almost a decade of that, and between that and COVID, it just feels like celebrity culture has just kind of lost all of its luster.
Yeah, I think so. I think people are turning on the whole concept of celebrity altogether. It almost seems like people don't like influencers anymore. There seems to be like a growing backlash against just the whole idea of it. Like people are just tired of the fakeness, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I've actually got an article coming up about that. One in particular, I don't know if you guys know who JoJo Siwa is.
I've heard
She
of
was
it.
the
She was like
child
a
star
pop
who got.
singer, right? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, she was on Dance Moms. That's where she got her big break and all that stuff. She kind of parlayed it into this career as like a child star with Nickelodeon. And but what was interesting is like she had a really, really, really bad 2024. I mean, her rebrand was a disaster. Her rebrand as an adult was it made Miley Cyrus's whole turn. You remember when Miley Cyrus tried to
Yeah, I
rebrand
saw
herself as an
pictures of
adult
it.
artist?
She looks like fucking Gene Simmons, but like a child doing Gene Simmons cosplay.
Yeah, and it went over like a lead balloon. I mean, she was a laughing stock for a couple months. And one of the things that's interesting, and the reason I was writing about it is because I wrote at the beginning of 2024 about the first cancellation of like of an internet celebrity, right, of 2024. And ultimately, it wasn't anything that major. The guy just made a dumbass financial decision, and everybody was clowning on him. But the funny thing about JoJo Siwa is that the last cancellation, which I think we can call it that, of 2024, is that on TikTok, apparently some guy uploaded a video and was just like, wouldn't it be funny if we just ignored her? Like, we just ignored her and we didn't pay attention to her at all. And it started this trend where people were just unsubscribing from her, muting her, blocking her, all this stuff. Like her sub count tanked on TikTok. And it manifested into other celebrities too. So I mean, it went on to like Kim Kardashian and all the, I can't remember the others, but it started this trend that's still ongoing where people are just like ignoring celebrities, making a dedicated attempt to just not pay attention to them. And I definitely think that speaks to what you're talking about is this whole collapse of celebrity influencers at large across the internet, where people are just tired of, I don't know how people ever really enjoyed their content to begin with, but when things are so bad for the average person right now, I just can't imagine why it didn't take longer for people to get tired of these guys like flashing their money and bragging about everything they have and showing off on TikTok, everything that they have that the average person doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like maybe it's what do you call, like, a delayed reaction, because I feel like I mentioned it a second ago, like the whole, like, Imagine thing that the celebrities did, and it just felt very, very tone deaf, and it was kind of universal. I don't know anybody personally or even saw online. I was like, no, actually, it was nice.
Yeah.
And it feels like we've just kind of hit the end of our rope with that, both with this opulent wealth that they have, but also it's just so incredibly out of touch, that it's just so out of sync right now. And I think Ape, you read about the whole, like, Mr. Beast thing. Like, I'd not heard of Mr. Beast before that, but pre 2020, like, this guy who's like, and you probably know, is he like a billionaire? He's got to be so rich, right?
Oh, he's a multi-millionaire.
Yeah, and doing all this stuff, he's giving away money, but also, like, you have to think, wow, this guy has a lot of money for really stupid shit. And, like, the same thing with all these movies or video games that are failing. Like, it just feels more out of touch than anything. And I don't know, maybe that's why we're seeing that. And then, like, I think celebrities are also a little too available, so it just doesn't feel special anymore.
Huh. That's an interesting
I think
point.
that's a big part of it. I mean, yeah, the mystique of the celebrity or the movie star just isn't there anymore, because now they can show off their every bit of their private life on TikTok, and that removes that barrier of mystique, intrigue, whatever you want to call it, that used to be there.
And then it seems like, there's a lot of people. I haven't been paying much attention to Chapel Roan, but I've heard that she is one of these celebrities or newer ones, who she sets really firm boundaries. And I guess she's gotten some shit about how she does it. I don't really know the details, but that ties into, like, I think, now that all that mystique is gone, we feel like they're real people, and like we have some sort of entitlement, like the collective we, to their lives that they're showing us, and to who they are, to, like, them as people. And I can't imagine that feels very good for them, but at the same time, I don't know. It's interesting. I'm curious, in the next few years, how this is going to play out, because when you see people like Chapel Roan actually, like, telling photographers, like, no, you don't talk to people this way. And, people on the one hand are celebrating her, and on the other hand saying that she's kind of an entitled bitch because, she signed up for this or whatever. I don't really agree with that, but yeah, I don't know. What do you think about the connection between, like, that entitlement people seem to feel, and, like, how they're simultaneously, like, rejecting it?
Well, it feels like a little bit like, a Madonna horror complex, but for celebrities. But
Yeah.
I think this is something we've seen, because it makes me think of, like, even back in, like, the 70s, like Led Zeppelin, for example, was famous for not doing interviews, and they built up a little bit more of mystique because of it. Or, like, another example that comes to mind, because I'm more on, like, I like a lot of classic rock stuff. The drummer of Rush was famous for, like, not wanting to do interviews and not wanting to talk to fans. It's like, I'm not trying to be a dick, but this is a job for me. I show up, I play my songs, I do these records. I'm glad you like them, but I'm not going to pretend to be your friend. So please just leave me alone. And some people don't like that. And I guess to a certain degree, I get, like, where people are coming from. Like, okay, I more or less pay your bills, right? The least you can do is take a picture with me. But I feel like also you could, like, I'm also a person too. I don't owe you everything at all hours of the day. I'm just an entertainer. Leave me alone. So I don't know. I can see both sides of it, but one early prediction I want to throw out there, I feel like 2025 is going to be the year where there's a sea change. And I feel like we're probably going to see within the next couple of years, it's going to be built into your contract if you're, like, an actor, a musician, game developer, like you don't get to use social media unless it's through like an approved channel. We're probably going to see like a lot more. At least that's my first prediction I'm throwing out there. We're going to see a lot more tight control of celebrity culture, at least how because I feel like there's been how many I don't know, like it's hard to like give a what's the word I'm looking for, a definitive one-to-one, like because this celebrity said this thing, it impacted their product. But it feels like just with all these flops that we're seeing, I feel like that's got to be a big part of it. And I like me and Ape, you and I talked about like the that chick from the new Star Wars show going on an unhinged rant like that. It couldn't have helped the show, when you're calling out anybody who doesn't like your show is racist or whatever. Even if there are racists who don't like it, like it'd probably be better to just like, hey, shut up. I liked celebrities a lot better when I didn't have to hear their opinions on things,
Yeah, I mean I'm more of the opinion that it's like they are entertainers. I hate to say like kind of like shut up and dance monkey, but that's kind of there's a lot of people who hold that opinion or that viewpoint of like celebrities. Like you're here to entertain, you're here to do a show. I don't need to know about your politics.
Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, then you've got the people that if like Dolly Parton, she doesn't really talk about politics, and you got people who are like, she's doing something wrong because of that, because she should be standing on the side of whatever, or against whatever. People get mad if you don't take a side. I think they got mad at Taylor Swift for not endorsing Kamala fast enough or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that was another thing. I was about to bring that up after you mentioned Dolly Parton because I remember like when Kamala came out, people were like, "Oh, Taylor Swift's silence on this is deafening,"
right?
And it's like, who cares?
Seriously, who cares? Did she convince a single person by endorsing her in the first place? The idea of celebrity endorsements is it seems so shallow. I just can't imagine any significant amount of people are actually swayed in one direction or another because a singer they like, picked somebody. I don't know.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think if any celebrity did actually change some minds, it was probably Taylor Swift because whatever she's got going on is like in a league of its own.
That's true.
I don't know what kind of witchcraft they use, but she does something to people that no one else is. Though I did put on my prediction list, I think 2025 is going to be the major year of like backlash against Taylor Swift. I think that's about hit its fever pitch.
Yeah. Why do you say that?
I mean, I just see a lot. Like, I mean, I'll admit, I like my bread and circuses. I watch the NFL. People can make of that what they like. But the thing is, like last season in 2023, when she was first going out with Travis Kelce, I believe that's his name. I can't keep the Kelce brothers straight. But it was like you were watching a game and that the Chiefs weren't even playing at, and they would cut to a scene of Taylor Swift at the Chiefs game earlier that day or that week, and it's like, are we here to watch football? Or are we here to watch Taylor Swift? Like, what are we doing here? And she was all anybody wanted to talk about at the Super Bowl, and it was all about her and all this stuff. And it got to the point where I think that the NFL crowned heads realized that people were very, very unhappy with that because this year you haven't heard a word about her. They'll show her at the Chiefs games, but that's about it. Like they don't talk about her nearly as much as they did before. And I think that's kind of like translating to this whole political push that was behind her with, Taylor Swift endorsed Kamala Harris and she said something mean about Trump and X, Y, and Z. I think that got in a lot of people. I think that put her in a bad spot with a lot of people who are now like just she's overexposed. They're tired of seeing her. I think that if there's a similar push to what you saw this year by her marketing team to kind of keep her in the spot that she's in, there's going to be a lot of people who come out and they're not just going to be agnostic about her, because that's my thing is like I try to be agnostic about Taylor Swift. She doesn't seem like a bad person. I just don't really care for her music. It's not for me. That's fine. But it was like I got to the point where I was like, I can't be agnostic because she's being shoved in my face at every corner, and I got tired of it.
Yeah.
And then I was like, then I disliked her.
Yeah, that'll happen.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, it feels like there's a lot of that across the board. One of the things you made me think of was like, because I'm not a football guy really, but it feels like just across the board, I'm seeing like there's I don't know if it's social media or just the nature of modern entertainment. Like there's no break from everything. Everything is cross promotion. You can't just like enjoy football. Also, here's Taylor Swift. And then you can't just watch a movie and then there's all this cross promotion. At least to me, like
Well, to bring it back to like to even make an example of a football player, I know a lot of people this year who the Chiefs are having like a banner year, right? They've lost one game, they're a serious Super Bowl contender, but everybody because like the coach Andy Reid and the quarterback Pat Mahomes and Travis Kelsey are in seemingly every other commercial on television. People want to see them lose just because they're tired of seeing them. Like people want them to see them taken down a peg. Nobody wants to see the three-peat happen because they're done with these guys.
yeah. Maybe we're seeing a lot of that. Maybe that's part of the reason why the Democrats lost. Because at least for me, like, and again, I've not voted Republican other than maybe like small local elections where it's maybe not as big of a deal. But it feels like the entirety, because I remember that's one thing I hear a lot when I still listen to a lot of like left wing media and like, well, Trump just won because he was able to, take advantage of this, right wing podcast network. And it's like, on one hand, so they, exploited this technicality of, going on shows that people watch who had built up an organic appeal over all, many years. And B, like you have the entirety of the mainstream media. And, I say this semi-neutrally because I didn't vote for Trump, but I kind of wanted to see Kamala lose because I was just so fucking tired of celebrities in the mass media being so obviously in lockstep and trying to tell people what to think and what to feel. So maybe we're seeing a lot more of that across the board.
Yeah.
I definitely think that's a big part of it.
Yeah. So kind of on that note, we can get into more predictions, but one more prediction I have is I feel like we're going to see a resurgence of like, I'm calling it hillbilly elegy core, where if I don't know if you guys remember like, early 2000s Bush era, when it was, the cowboy chic was in, the patriotism it was in. I think we're going to see that make a comeback. I don't necessarily think it's going to be, MSNBC is going to like turn on a dime or like Sean Penn, but I feel like there's definitely going to be a resurgence of that because I mean, kind of like I said, and again, I'm somebody who like voted for Bernie Sanders, and even me, like I am completely checked out of mainstream media because of how clearly partisan it is, and like even if like you're a left leaning person who like there's all this talk about DEI wokeness representation in movies. I never even had a problem with it, but it's gotten to the point where it's so overt. It feels like it's more about the messaging than the story or anything like that. So I feel like you've locked out just a huge portion of the population, and that's just market forces. There's going to be something that's going to rise to meet that. So what do you think?
I think you're right about that.
I think we're already seeing it to a degree because I mean the biggest artists of the year overall are going to go down as like Taylor Swift, Sabrina Carpenter, Kendrick Lamar, those characters. But if you look at who was, I think, more culturally impactful, like the guys who are going to have, I guess, more staying power, I suppose you could say, or people who were like, what I'm saying is like when I had friends, I don't use TikTok, but everybody I know does, and I get sent TikToks like at least a dozen a day, right? And when I got a TikTok, the music wasn't Taylor Swift or Sabrina Carpenter. It was country or country adjacent artists like Morgan Wallen and Jelly Roll and Shabuzi. And even Post Malone this year, I mean, I would hesitate to call his new music country, but he's leaning really hard into the country aesthetic. And I think country music's been on the rise for a while, this new country that I think was kind of like epitomized by Morgan Wallen, but I certainly think it's got a sunny future ahead of it for the next couple of years.
Didn't Beyonce do a country record or something like it's aesthetically country?
It's funny that that caused some controversy. Well, she had the song Texas Hold'em, which had a country feel to it, but I listened to I was excited because I'm not really a Beyonce fan, but I am a country fan. And so I was excited to hear the rest of the album because I liked her take on that song. But the rest of it wasn't country at all. Like there was nothing country about the album besides that one song, in my humble opinion.
No,
Yeah,
I
I think
agree. I've heard her cover of Jolene, and I know it got the endorsement from Dolly Parton herself, but I was like, yeah, it's not doing it for me.
yeah, not at all. It's kind of a bummer.
Yeah, well, between that, like and this was a couple years ago at this point, like the Old Town Road song that had that flavor. Like I know there's some
Yeah,
controversy about, they didn't let it on the country charts. Like it's not a country song; it's a hip hop song that has a slight country flavor. Or
exactly.
what was that? I thought it was this year. I looked it up. That song "Richmond of North Richmond," which was last year, but
Mm-hmm.
like that. First of all, on a side note, that guy really like overestimated his popularity because I remember him like, I'm not going to sign a record deal. I'm going to go independent. And like, he really should have taken the deal because he did not do anything in the last year. But it feels like there's like, they talk about like, in the 70s, like the black exploitation films, there's like a redneck exploitation thing that's on the rise, if that makes
Huh.
sense.
Yeah, I can see that.
No, I mean, I would agree with that. And the
I think
thing
some
is,
of
like, I don't
it's.
know where. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say I think some of it's a little self-aware. Like when you were talking about Jelly Roll, I think about Hardy too. Like he was not always country, but now he's super country. And at least his last album, and he has this song called Rednecker Than You, and it's hilarious. And he's just making fun of being a redneck. And the video's a riot too. But there's a lot of that. And I don't know, it's probably been present in country for a while, but there just seems to be a little more self-awareness about like those stereotypes and leaning into them proudly. Whereas like I
Yeah, I
remember
mean,
like
that's always
90s
kind of.
like
Yeah,
90s
no,
country would
no, I
have
mean,
like an
like,
opposite. Sorry.
Garth Brooks and
no, no,
that
no.
type of
You
thing.
you finish your thought. Sorry
There
about
was
that.
no, I was just going to compare it to like 90s and early 2000s country. I remember, back then I would hear a lot of country songs that were like, I want to get out of this small town and go to the city. But now it's like the exact opposite in
Mhm.
country music. They're much more, I mean, you've always had the pride in the country,
Mhm.
redneck pride kind of thing, but it just seems a lot more overt now. There's none of that, like, I want to get out of here and move to the big world.
Well, it feels like that's almost, especially after COVID, you talked about it. It feels like it's almost a bigger bet because, at least for me, like, it was 2020 made me, and, the subsequent years made me realize how delicate the supply chain is. It's like, okay, maybe I should learn how to grow my own vegetables because, like, my dad grew up in a log cabin, my mom grew up on a farm, and they worked their ass off, and, they ended up getting a house in the suburbs. And it's funny that like the American dream has kind of subverted like that. Like I would love to be able to afford like just a medium-sized house in the country area and have that. But the other thing it made me think of is I wonder if, because at least again, like you're talking about, because I think we're all around the same age, like in the 90s and 2000s, even like with up until even, really the last couple years, country was the antithesis of cool,
Mhm.
honky tonk, whatever. Um, but I feel like maybe because it's been, and I think Ape, you touched on this too, like at this point, almost 10 years of just like overt hatred of, rural people because the Trump supporters like just this open disdain that it's almost like looped back around and made it kind of cool. Like it, because at this point, like it's something I've noticed too. And I'll throw it back to you guys. Similarly, like when we were growing up, being religious was the antithesis of cool. If you're
Yeah.
religious, you're a dork, you're a nerd, Um, and I've noticed like for Gen Z, like that's not the case, and people younger, and there's almost like a slight countercultural affectation because that's like I feel like that's the only thing that hasn't been exploited by Hollywood and the media to the degree that say black culture or punk rock, whatever it is. That's basically the only thing that like is still untouched by that whole world because that's always been uncool for the most part.
I mean, I certainly think that's part of it. Like, there is just a pushback against a lot of these things But what's interesting to bring this back to the country thing is like a lot of these guys we're talking about though, like they want to flex their country cred. Like one of the things that always stuck in my craw about like Post Malone going out there and being like, "Oh yeah, I'm country. I'm from Texas." We grew up in the same town around the same time. You were not
Mhm.
country, my friend.
Yeah.
we were we were not country. Beyonce says she's country because she's from Houston. My dad's from Houston. I spent a lot of time there. That's not country either. I think Jelly Roll's from Nashville, which is not country. And it seems like a lot of people are trying to like flex this cred because it's like you said, the antithesis to what was cool. Um, because like what was cool like 10 years ago, and you guys can correct me on this, but my memory seems to be like 10 years ago, if we go back to like 2014, it was like the hipster stuff, the guys with the man
Yeah.
buns and they wear
Mhm.
suspenders and they were really weird about their beards, and they
Yeah.
listened to what I call like the boom clap stomp music
Yeah.
that like Mumford and
Mhm.
Sons did. Like that was cool, and that was like steeped in urbanity, I suppose you could say.
Mhm. Yeah, well, actually, I just released a piece today that kind of riffs on. Do you guys remember the song "Safe and Sound" by Capital Cities?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
to me, that feels like the absolute epitome of that genre. Like, I called it like the end of history, but for pop culture. Because even that song specifically, you had all these different dancers of all these different genres and all these different ages, all dancing together, and it was like a very cosmopolitan. You're right, very urban, but also not very particular to any city or any era. Like, because even at the time, like a lot of the indie rock stuff or indie dance or even the hip hop at the time was kind of like very throwback. Because I remember to me, like around 2014, 2014, 2015, that era, early 2010s, before the Trump era, that was like that was the era where indie rock, like sad boy, sad girl music was on the out, and it was cool for white people to dance again, but they weren't like listening to hip hop and stuff yet, or at least not, it wasn't a hip thing. But yeah, it was universal, but and not particular. So, and I guess maybe there's something a little bit more particular about country music, or that era, or not that era, that genre, that aesthetic. So I don't know. Does that make any sense? Am I tracking it all?
No, I see
I,
what you're saying. I mean, it sounds like you're kind of comparing that period to like, kind of like a gray goo of music where there's like nothing really defining about it. It just kind of was what it was. It didn't really have an identity outside of not having an identity.
Yeah, Starbucks music type of stuff.
yeah.
That's a good way of putting it.
And you know what you said about patriotism, like how you see like the Bush years kind of vibes coming back, or how you predict that might come back. I think that probably has to do with country too, because that is kind of the specific vibe of country music is very much American, very much like USA, you know,
Hmm.
like it's very patriotic music, even if it's not about patriotism, because it's got a very uniquely American sound to it. Maybe that has something to do with why people are turning to it, just it goes back to the rest of the return to tradition, the
Yep.
actual physical country itself, and then the music that goes along with it, something that's uniquely American that they don't feel has been globalized, I guess.
Yeah, because it's more popular abroad than you'd think it would be. But yeah, country music is, very specific to the United States for the most part.
Yeah.
But yeah. So any other? Because I think I asked you for any other predictions in general that you guys have. That what are your like out there predictions for 2025?
Well, one of mine, I mean, I thought for sure, and I don't know if I still feel as strongly about this, but the whole Luigi and Brian Thompson thing,
Oh yeah.
that I I feel like that might have, you know, been the straw that broke the camel's back, and I think we're going to probably see more political violence. I don't know if outright assassinations are going to continue, but
Well,
that's
they
going
tried to kill Trump. I mean, I saw
yeah.
some. I don't want to interrupt. Keep on saying your thing, but it feels like we're in that era,
Mhm.
and it's one of those things. Like once that seal is broken, it's broken.
Yeah, exactly. And I keep seeing like, flashes of like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., or not Jr., whatever, or the
Mhm.
regular one in the
Mhm.
60s getting shot. And I don't know, I keep getting like images of the 60s in my head, like thinking we're about to start this new year just kind of like that. I don't know
No,
if,
that's. Oh, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, I actually put down the same thing where, I mean, I think it's less of a, I mean, it's political, but I think it's more of a class thing where I think that the Brian Thompson, and you're right that the Trump assassination attempt really took one of the major seals off, so to say. But I feel like the Brian Thompson assassination brought it down from a political thing to more of like a class thing. Like
Yeah.
I think
And I
we're
say
going to see.
politics as an umbrella to cover
Mhm.
class,
Right,
I guess, but
right, and I mean it is a political thing, but but it's going to be on like largely non-political figures. I think it's going to be on like
yeah.
just generally wealthy, as they would say, like
Mhm.
one percenters.
Exactly.
Populist violence in general.
Yeah, I
Yeah, I
think
mean,
so.
I was talking to somebody else. I haven't released it yet, but I was talking to a friend of mine, Casey Shea Gallagher, and we were, we're not the first person to make the comparison to Luigi Mangione. Is it Mangione or Mangione? I've said it both ways.
I don't
I
know.
think it's Mangione.
I've been saying, okay, Luigi Mangione and Ted Kaczynski, because I feel like for both of them, like on one level, like with with Ted Kaczynski, like he has the whole fucking manifesto that he put out there, and there's a lot of correspondence for him. But even still, like to loop back to he's popular in the tech world for it's seemingly paradoxically, but in
Mhm.
a way that makes sense if you're familiar with And again, as a tech worker, I kind of get it because you get very disconnected from the real world and you start to long for your cabin in the woods. But Luigi Mangione, his he didn't he basically more or less write his manifesto on like a napkin, so like people can just project. There are some people like your Ben Shapiro's and whatnot who are condemning it, and Elon Musk. And I almost wonder if that's why he freaked out so hard about the H-1B thing, but it because it was so open-ended. Like it doesn't matter if you're right wing, if you're left wing, you can project your ideology onto Luigi Mangione and his actions.
Mhm. Yeah, you can, and people are.
Yeah,
That's
and it
another
was
part.
funny.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Just real quick. That's another part of um I can't remember what we were talking about, where how I this violence, like the way that let me try to put it together, sorry. But you know how we were talking about how I thought that the right might end up picking up some of these more working class ideas and at least give some lip service to labor conditions. But this seems to be just kind of like an exclamation point to that, where that's going, because it seems like with of course plenty of people have been condemning the folks who have been like celebrating what Luigi did and everything, but the sheer number of people like that just span political lines who have voiced some sort of approval or just not, at least not outright like condemnation, is, I feel like, kind of a big sign, that the class is definitely making a reappearance in politics
Hmm.
in a big way.
And
Yeah,
not
yeah,
to
no, that's what
sorry,
I was going to say.
yeah, just to jump in, not to toot my own horn, but I wrote an article about this, called 10,000 Ted Kaczynskis. And the TLDR of it was, and I made this prediction at the very beginning of this year, actually, that we're just going to see more and more instances of lone wolf violence that, again, it's in a way kind of apolitical. Like, if you look
Somewhat
at,
ideological.
yeah, but it's so hyper specific because to whoever does it, it's not because it wasn't there like there's the techno primitivist Ted Kaczynski party or the anti corporate let's murk CEOs party. Like it's
Right.
specific to these people and their lives and their conditions, and because everybody is so isolated in experiencing these things individually, even though like it's basically the same material conditions for everybody, you're just going to see more and more isolated instances of violence that it's either hyper specific or just somebody vaguely they've it's the one bad day thing from the Batman comic. Somebody just got pushed too far, they go postal, they do something really violent, but it's because it's they're reacting off the conditions that everybody's experiencing, that even if you don't agree with the violence, you're like I at least get where he was coming from.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excuse me. So yeah, I think we're probably unfortunately going to see a lot more of that.
Yeah, I think
But,
so.
mhm. But yeah. Any other major predictions either of you guys have?
And not to get too deep in the weeds on politics, I think I'll just read off some of these.
All
I
right,
think
shoot.
Ukraine. I think the Ukraine war is going to come to an end one way or another. I don't know what form of the end it's going to take, but I think it's probably going to stop in the first months of the year.
Agreed.
I think Trump's going to broker a peace of some sort. I doubt it's going to be very good for the Ukrainians, but unfortunately, that's just the position that they're at now.
Hmm.
I also
Yeah.
think that Israel is probably going to annex parts of their neighbors and Gaza as a whole. And King Charles, I don't think he's going to see 2026.
Really?
This is one of my hot takes. I think I would agree with you, and I'll go one step further to say I think that's the end of the British monarchy.
Hmm.
I don't think that
I
they're
wouldn't be
gonna.
surprised.
Well, I mean, just because I feel like there's no popular support for it, I could be talking out of my ass on this one just because I don't follow British royal politics, but I know like King Charles gave a statement recently that has like a lot of more like right wing nationalist British people mad at him, and like those are the only people who actually care about and like the British royal crown. So that's my very left of center off the wall prediction that I agree with Ape. He's probably either going to die or like leave the throne and abdicate. And just the British royal crown is just going to be like, all right, we're done with this. We don't need to do royalty anymore. Or at least they won't be public facing anymore.
I would not be surprised if it goes that direction after the past couple of years they've had with controversy and everything. I wouldn't be surprised.
Mm-hmm.
Me neither.
Yeah.
Speaking of monarchy, I think that was one of my other predictions on the list is that I think we're going to see a lot more people openly discussing whether or not democracy is even a good idea because I used to hear about some of that from the left during Occupy, like people talking about negatively about democracy, but in favor of something like a consensus-based, electoral process. But now I'm hearing it more from the right, and who like people on the right who are more interested in, say, monarchy, for example, or just other forms of governing. And I think that we're going to see a lot more people just openly discussing that, whereas before talking about disagreeing with democracy was so much of a taboo. I see that taboo breaking down now.
I see that in my everyday life, believe it or not. There are avowed monarchists in my town in the political system, and it has caused no shortage of drama. And I'm not going to say I disagree with them, but I think that the people who are vociferously against them are fooling themselves if they think there's going to be an American monarchy anytime soon.
Yeah.
But I don't think that there is going to be an American monarchy, at least not in our lifetimes. But I do agree with you in the sense like it's going to get more the idea is going to proliferate, if only because I'm literally seeing that right now.
Yeah.
I would agree. I take it a step further where it feels like there's the era where I mean that was because up until a couple years ago, like I didn't because I remember like finding out like wait, people are actually monarchist. I thought it was a joke, and I went down that rabbit hole like Curtis Yarvin, Nick Land, all those people, and I don't necessarily agree with it, but I see where it's coming from because I mean, what could you say? I mean, I feel like if this is another 4 years down the road, but I feel like there's a really good chance the Republicans are going to totally squander this opportunity because Donald Trump is, I heard a quote earlier this year of like, yes, all the celebrities endorsed Kamala Harris, but we have the celebrity. Donald Trump is the most famous person on the entire planet by a really wide margin. Like the way people treat Donald Trump, and even to a lesser degree at the time, I don't think she had enough time to get off the ground. But like Kamala Harris, like you treat or Taylor Swift for that matter, because you talked about that too, Abe. Like, what are these people except monarchs, really? They larger than life figures who You know, they're regal and royal in a certain way. Like, you know, you're starting to see in celebrity culture, and again, maybe this is part of the reason why it's on the downslope, that it's just so openly nepotistic. Like Hollywood is like a modern nobility. I feel like we're going to see that a lot more in politics, where, you know, whoever takes, I don't think we're going to go back from the Trump era, and this is, you know, the Trump era. I think he kind of destroyed Obama's legacy for better or worse. It's going to be another strong man or woman. Like, I don't think we're going to go back to the way things were. Like, oh, well, let's, you know, debate and find a consensus. I think it's going to be another strong personality.
No, I agree with that because the whole Biden campaign was run on, oh, the adults are back in the room. Oh, the sensible people are back in the room. And we're going to go back to the, business as usual, the way things were done back in the good old days. And if anything, I feel like the Biden administration, for all their faults, some of these were like beyond their control, but that's just not the way the politics game is played now.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting about what you said is that, I could, for as much as I feel like, yes, there is like a Taylor Swift backlash coming and there's going to be more refutation of celebrities and influencers, you could be right that there could be an inverse coming. And I think this speaks to a bigger bifurcation of culture where instead, like, you're not just going to have like a milieu of so celebrities, but you're going to have like the mega stars and you're going to have no one. Like, there's going to be a strict divide between the new nobility in the media and everybody else, if that makes sense.
No, I agree. I think it's going to be either like micro celebrities, you know, not to toot our own horns, but, you know, people like us who have a very small platform, but, you know, have an audience who likes the very specific thing we do, or it's Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
But no, I could definitely see that. I feel like we've definitely, and the other thing that made me think about that, I saw something posted, you know, people like, you know, talking about, oh, Elon Musk, he's, you know, he's an asshole, he's doing XYZ. We need to get a good billionaire in charge. And they had Taylor Swift. And to me, like, you know, I called it, it's just such peasant mindset where, like, I feel like that's, if you would have lived in, like, you know, Spain and, you know, 1476, that's how you would have thought about, like, oh, you know, Lord Primrose, or, you know, it's Spain, so, you know, Lord Cortez, he was such a cruel and terrible ruler, but now his son Hidalgo has taken over, so he'll be much more kind to us. Because, like, it feels like, again, with the monarchism thing, we're kind of, and to me, that was one of the bigger things about me seeing the right openly seceding their, you know, their kind of political power to somebody like Elon Musk or Trump. Like, that's the way. It's not democratic even remotely, which is something, you know, that I think that the left, and ironically enough the far right, would agree with. Like, you know, it's very much not democratic, and you're just, you know, putting your faith in a monarch basically, because you have, you know, Trump, for better or for worse, he is very open to feedback, I would say, for worse for the most part, just because he seems like he's too easily influenced. But, like, what are you going to do with Elon Musk? He is, on paper at least, the richest man in the world. And he's, you know, he even said, you know, fuck you to Bob Iger. He said, oh, I'm just going to buy Twitter. He owns, you know, he owns Twitter. He owns Starlink. He owns Tesla. So, I mean, this man owns communication, transportation, and infrastructure. Like, what could you possibly do to Elon Musk? Which is, you know, the unfortunate side for, you know, his supporters who are now mad about the whole H-1B thing.
Well, I mean, it just kind of ties back to what I've been saying for a while. It's kind of a rise of like techno feudalism,
Mm-hmm.
where these new oligarchs in the tech field are basically going to be feudal lords in the future because they're going to control. And I know that's not exactly how feudalism worked in Europe or medieval
Mm-hmm.
Europe, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, like, you're going to have these unelected oligarchs who control, like you said, infrastructure, communication infrastructure, transport, X, Y, and Z, and they're going to need to be kept fat and happy in order to, for anything to get done, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
It's
maybe
going
to a
to be,
degree, that's how it's been for a long time, and we just don't know it, or we weren't really aware of it. I mean, if you look at FDR, he was on a display of a lot of these industrialists, or the bigwigs of his time. But I think it's just becoming more apparent now that, like we're saying, like with social media and celebrities, maybe it's just becoming more transparent, and they don't really care that
yeah,
everybody knows that they're basically a warlord at this point.
it does feel more pronounced. And I've made this joke in the past, like, it feels like in the future, you're just gonna, like, what, techno feudal lord do I want to live under? Like, do I want to go live under the fiefdom of Lord Musk or Lord Bezos or, Lord Zuckerberg? Like, which, if you want to be a peasant, who is the best dental plan, right?
Yeah, and I mean that's kind of worrisome because none of them are great guys.
Right.
No, they seem to be mostly pretty categorically terrible.
I feel like this desire of some people, and maybe, I've seen this online. I don't actually know real life people who are monarchists, but I wonder how much of it is like actually leaning into the idea of being taken care of by some sort of monarch that you don't actually have a choice over. Like, do we have decision fatigue about democracy now?
Yeah.
Like about choosing and having it just, maybe we're cynical about how, things like the electoral college and other things that we just see not working out in our favor, or how Bernie was treated at the primaries in 2016, or even Ron Paul back in 2012,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Do you mean like as a cope or as like a
Yeah.
formalization of like, this, it's so obviously undemocratic, we might as well just, pick somebody who's going to be in our interest?
Yeah, pretty much for the most part. Like,
Mhm.
like they're almost, I mean, it sounds like a joke to pick your feudal lord or whatever, but I mean, it almost seems like people are leaning toward that just because, yeah, it probably has a bit of a cope, but also, just like, well, if it's already like this, then why not just
Yeah, dispense with the politeness and
Formalities.
civilities and just get rid
exactly.
of.
Yeah. Well, that's
Well,
kind of what
and
I've, sorry, go ahead, Yape.
well, I was just gonna say, like, very briefly, talking to these guys that I know who are avowed monarchists, part of their, I mean, that's kind of like part of it actually, is that and this is going to be a hot take. I don't think everybody should vote. Now, it shouldn't be discriminated against gender or class or whatever, but you should have to take a voter literacy test. Like, you should at least be able to name the first 5 presidents before you cast a ballot. That, to me, is a no-brainer.
Mhm.
But these people are convinced that most people shouldn't vote no matter what, and that they are of a peasant mindset. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. We're not here to wring hands about it, but that's just what they say. And they say it's cruel to bring them into the political system when they have no place in it. I don't agree with that completely. I see where they're coming from, but at the same time, it's kind of reductionist.
Yeah.
But that's where they come from, is like most people are not capable of indulging in politics. Now I ask them, why are you capable of indulging in politics and everybody else isn't? That's
Mhm.
the question that usually trips them up. Like, why are you, what makes you the anointed one? But again, that's
Everybody thinks
neither
they're
here nor there.
noble. Nobody wants to admit they're a peasant.
Exactly.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean,
I I would
go ahead.
soft agree. No, I would say I would soft agree because I remember calling back to, I listened to Lerp. I listened to something you did with Cryptogal, and you're talking about um people were saying it was a less legitimate election because they made it easier to vote. There's a part of me, because I came from a much more left populist
Mhm.
background, but there is a part of me that kind of agrees with Abe now, like, maybe we should make it harder to vote, not easier to vote.
Yeah.
I don't know, because that's always the thing, right? Because like you don't want it to be based on, like, like Abe said, it's barbaric to base it off of, I would say, like identity characteristics like
Mhm.
ethnicity, gender, etc. But at the same time, like, there's a good middle ground between, like, the founding of the United States. You could only do it if you're like a landowning white male, and like now you can do mail-in votes. Is there a way to make sure that people who are voting actually have a stake? But I don't know, I feel like you probably disagree. So what are your thoughts?
Me or Abe?
You
Um,
Lerpa.
well, I mean, my first inclination is to say no, everyone should vote. But I mean, the when you when you think about it, it's nobody knows what they're voting for half the time, and that's
Mhm.
kind of the problem. and I guess I can appreciate this about from what I've heard anyway from like the vote-in states. I mean, Abe, if you're in Washington, isn't Washington entirely vote-in or mail-in right now?
Not that I saw.
Oh, maybe I'm just thinking of something else. I don't know.
I know that they really pushed it this year, but
Yeah.
there were
Well,
like drop-in ballots and stuff. That was a big deal because people were going around destroying drop-in ballots and
yeah.
ballot boxes, and yeah.
Well, I think man, see, this is a hard question because if you can't like actually explain, say, what the executive branch does, then like honestly, I think you should choose to stay home. You know what I mean? And so, like, putting a law in place that says you have to is, I mean, I don't know. It's like I said before. It's anything anti-democratic is so taboo that like I can't even say it right now because
Mhm.
I don't. I also soft agree. You know what I'm saying? Like the sort of some sort of
Yeah.
literacy test would be
I
ideal just to ensure that we're not being led by literally people who have no fucking idea what they're voting for, you know?
Mhm. I would say I soft agree, but like, what's that old Winston Churchill quote of like, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others.
Yeah.
Like I feel like I don't have a better solution, right? Because part of me like, there's a lot of dialogue about if whether or not voter ID laws were racist. And
Mhm.
part of me get where it's coming from, but also like, okay, so is like getting an apartment racist? Is having a bank account racist, all these different things you need an ID, an ID for. And like there had to, because to me, like on one level, I get it. I've heard the arguments. I get where it's coming from. But at the same time, I kind of think like, if you don't have your shit together enough to get an ID, then, I don't want to say like, again, because it feels like so taboo to say like, maybe you shouldn't vote if you don't have your shit together enough to
Right.
get an ID. Um, but at the same time, like there has to be some kind of barrier, even if it's just like physically showing up. Because there's a part of me that's like, maybe mail-in voting is not a good idea. It makes it too easy. I hate to even get into this side because I'm agnostic on the 2020 election and vis-a-vis whether or not there was fuckery going on, but it makes it objectively speaking, if you're looking at it completely objectively, it's easier to use fraud if you're using mail-in ballots than if you have people physically coming in and voting just materially, right?
Yeah.
Is
And do
that
you remember, not to interrupt, but do you remember that whole campaign about how like people were telling women like your husband doesn't have to know who you vote for, voting is
oh
private.
yeah,
Yeah, and
which
if you've got everybody doing this from home, I mean, you can't control the privacy of the person who's
mhm,
checking the boxes, you know? So
yeah.
you
Also, like
actually could run into that problem.
yeah. On a side note, there's maybe I guarantee there are like more like Democrat women who are hectoring their husbands over,
Oh yeah.
voting than like because again, not to backtrack too much, but there's like that the video of like these leering men with MAGA hats and the women like smiling and oh, we're doing our act of resistance, which at least to me, I don't know how you felt about that, Lurpa. It felt kind of condescending towards women. I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know what it was a
I find
little.
all that kind of stuff very condescending towards women. It drives me crazy.
Yeah.
Well, and the funny thing is, at the ballot place that I went to, you weren't even allowed to wear. Like people showed up with MAGA hats, and they were like, "You got to take that off before you go in. You can't come in." Like there's a rule against like coming in with any kind of paraphernalia for who you're voting for.
Yeah,
Which
Huh.
same.
I mean, I don't really have a problem with, but it was just funny because I was like, nobody's, they nobody's gonna know who you're voting for at that point.
Mhm.
Yeah, if you walk in with a MAGA hat, it's pretty safe to assume. But at the same time, like
Yeah. What
if
it's like
that's
it's
the
going to
case, and they're
influence
making,
people or something. That's the logic.
I I don't really get the logic, but
Or
I also,
intimidation or something.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, like I kind of get it at the same time. But it's one of those things. Like I saw that this year. My sister back in Texas saw it happen as well because there was a guy who's gone in with like a MAGA shirt, and they were like, "You need to cover that, or you gotta go change."
Mhm. Okay. So do we want to do? We're probably coming close to the time here. Like, any final predictions or thoughts? Any sage words about 2024 or advice going into 2025?
My
I'm
only
just
other
looking
real
forward to the show. I want to. This trial is going to be wild, but yeah, I think it's going to be a crazy year. I'm looking forward.
Oh, Luigi Mangioni's trial.
Yeah, sorry, that's specific, but that and everything else, I'm just looking forward to seeing what the fuck happens.
I was
Yeah,
going to say,
that's
I mean,
fair.
the only other one we haven't touched on is that I think that there's going to be a specifically a housing market correction, if not this year, then next year. But I just do not see a future where the housing market something doesn't happen.
Oh yeah, this is maybe a heavy prediction to drop on the closing thoughts, but I feel like we're probably going to see a pretty major financial crash this year, if I had to guess. I don't know if you guys follow that kind of thing, but there's talk about the sovereign debt crisis or the BRICS countries, and dollar default, all this different stuff. I feel like either this year or next year, most likely this year, it's going to be a pretty significant economic downturn.
Yeah, no, I agree. So get your ducks in a row while you can.
As much as is possible. Yeah, those are kind of my major ones. Other than we could get super granular about every little thing, but it feels like this is going to be another really crazy year. 2024 was crazy, but I guess we'll see. Like Lopa said, let's enjoy the ride and hope for the best.
Yeah.
Well, I will say I saw this one tweet and it's just been living in my head since I saw it, and it was, I ain't seen nobody say that 2025 is going to be their year. Y'all are scared as hell.
Yeah, but that having been said, we hope for the best. But yeah, I guess I appreciate you guys coming on. Do you guys have anything you want to plug before we sign off? Anything coming up for either of you?
I got a few in the works, but yeah, one on the Manosphere and Red Pill guys. That one's coming soon. Nice.
And you started your own podcast recently, didn't you?
Oh, I did, yeah. And Kate and I, Crypto Gal and I are talking about some upcoming interviews too. So hopefully, I don't have anything scheduled just yet, but hopefully we'll have something out soon.
Yeah, well, I will keep an eye on that. Ape, you have anything cool coming up?
I've got a huge backlog of half-finished articles from the past 2 months that I've been too busy with travel and family to finish up, but those will all be coming in the good Lord, I lost my train of thought. The beginning of the month. In the beginning of the year, maybe. Jeez.
All very cool.
But yeah, I'm just plugging away. My productivity kind of took a hit this last month, but it'll be back, and I just got a lot of stuff on the docket, and I'll be appearing on some more podcasts. I've already got some lined up, so looking forward to it.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, me too. Well, once again, for everybody in the audience, this is a new segment / new podcast that I'm starting to launch called the Digression Sessions. Lord willing, if they're willing to come back on, I'm going to have Ape and Lerpa back on. This is going to be a panel show. Different people who I've had on in the past or different people I'd like to talk to. It's going to be like this, a little bit more free form and open. And, we'll discuss a topic and be a little bit more kind of open-ended, loosey-goosey like this. But, well, thanks so much for coming, you guys. Do you have any signing off, closing advice or sage thing for 2025? Are you feeling good?
Feeling pretty good. Yeah, this has been fun. We'll see if our predictions hold up.
Yeah,
sure. We should do a 2025 interview where we come back and talk about whether or not what we predicted came true or not.
Yeah, we should.
We will indeed. Well, everybody, thanks for listening, and come back. Make sure you stay subscribed to both Yakubi and Ape and Purpose Strike and myself, and you'll hear a lot more from us in the next year. All right, thanks a lot.